Homosexuality and its handling in English law. For many before, and for many still, the societal barrier for those being denied their free expression of their sexuality, personality, and beliefs still does exist, however not as heavily as it has before. Life has not always been this colorful. The Greek and Roman cultures, being the origin point of many of our modern-day political, economical, and philosophical concepts, were likewise the origin of our concept on homosexuality. This was concentrated in the evidence of paintings and other artworks, some of which were directly depicting the act directly, or others showing, like this one, the symbolic representation of man-to-man relations. This specific work is a fresco tomb painting from the north wall of the Tomb of the Diver, in Paestum, Italy, circa 480 BCE. Furthermore, in a work composed by John Batchel from Fordham University, cites the works of Plato and states homosexuality, Plato wrote, regarded as shameful by barbarians and by those who live under despotic governments, just as philosophy is regarded as shameful by them. Because it is apparently not in the interest of such rulers to have great ideas engendered in their subjects, or powerful friendships or passionate love, all of which homosexuality is particularly apt to produce. This quote, in plain, predominantly showcases the ideas and views of such topics in this time period. As he states in this same article, to a very large extent, Western attitudes towards law, religion, literature, and government are dependent upon Roman attitudes. This makes it particularly striking that our attitudes towards homosexuality and sexual tolerance in general are so remarkably different from those in the Romans. Which leads us into analyzing later legislation that happened after the Renaissance, where the study of such cultures in greater detail led to further progression into answering this question. Writers like Thomas Aquinas tried to portray homosexuality as one of the very worst sins. A religious element is being brought in about suppressing and creating a negative connotation with this by associating it with being one of the worst sins. And what he says directly, one of the very worst sins, second only to murder. And I think these writings likely helped to influence eventual publication of acts like the Burglary Act in 1533 by the British Parliament, and written by Stephen Dryden in his account of the LGBT rights in the UK, what he would say being the very first time that homosexuality was targeted for legal prosecution. Burglary Act of 1533 lasted up until its reformative measure of 1861, which was the passing of the Offenses Against the Persons Act, in which the death penalty was abolished only pertaining to acts of sodomy. Sodomy is defined as sexual intercourse involving anal or oral copulation. It wasn't until post-World War II that homosexuality was brought back around in the public view legislatively when transgenders and homosexuals began to be arrested and prosecuted in larger numbers. It should be without question noted that in 1946 the first transgender male underwent his transformation in becoming Michael in the United Kingdom. Later, Roberta Cromwell, 1951, to be the first female in the United Kingdom. These individuals broke the ever-pressing barrier of the time and ultimately made lead for others to follow in their footsteps to challenge the social climate and culture at the time. These large figures led to the eventual publication of Wolfenden Report, which was composed by the committee that began its meeting the same year that Cromwell's autobiography was published. This report broke the barriers set forth by its legislative body, challenging the legislation that allowed for prosecution of homosexuality and other punishable offenses. This report, however, wasn't implemented into the British law until 10 years after its publication, which took the form of the Sexual Offences Act of 1967. Despite all the British's progress and strides towards sexual freedom and anti-homosexuality, the Danish were the first to officiate the equality between marriages in its Registered Partnership Act of 1989, beating all other nations in the world to break the barrier and the rights to love freely. The Danish made the first steps in which many other nations were soon to follow, over much later. These landmark legislative cases allowed for future public figures to alter public views on topics of homosexuality and acceptance. Influential figures broke societal barriers and changed our mentality. Large and notable groups like Gay Liberation Front, or more commonly referred to as the GLF, were the first organization to organize the Gay Pride March on July 1st of 1972, which gave way to being the first defining depictions of gay pride in the world. Other less political challenging figures like RuPaul and Ellen to further break and redefine our boundaries of acceptance later on.
mean, why can't I just say the truth? I mean, be who I am. I'm 35 years old. I'm so afraid to tell people. I mean, Susan, I'm gay.
Gender theory being taught in schools, especially in primary schools. All of those, they say here, are threats to family values. And it's those family values that are very much at the heart of the demonstration. It's the family values that are really symbolised on all of the flags with a mother and a father and two children that many of the protesters are waving. Despite that current message, many of the protesters also calling for the repeal of the law that was passed over 3 years ago now, legalising same-sex marriage here in France.
So with the changing societal outlook and mentalities that are always happening, and obviously our narrative of human history is always forever changing, this documentary has made me realize that it is very important to always be aware of those that came before us. And I think, wow, all the information that I've learned, because this documentary was not just a short documentary on the history of LGBT in Western law, but it also was a documentary of my discovery of a lot of the history in it, because I didn't know much going into it. With documenting that, I learned that I really need to appreciate my ability to walk down the street with my head held high and appreciate those that came before me, because the simple right that I just take for granted, that was just given to me, was something I didn't have to fight for when I was 16, isn't something that everyone has always had. And it's really important that we are aware of that. Some people don't have the ability to take something for granted because they didn't even have the ability in the first place. So this documentary is not only informational, but also a reminder. I was editing and I did not like how I was gonna end the video, so we're doing this again. Life is not good or bad. Life is not black and white. There is so many different colors and shades and tones in between, and it's not the same for everyone. And so important to maintain happiness and balance in our lives. So we should really take what we've been given and we should move into life and really shape the world into how we want it. And that is what I'm leaving you with for this documentary. Thank you for coming along with me with my growth and my discovery and witnessing the short history of LGBT rights in Western law and in society up to 2019.